The basics of the camera. The recording media. By now, you should have an understanding of the basics of the camera with regard to light and the lens. This lesson takes a look at the foundations and the basics of the recording media. The links to the first videos are posted below the view pane if you're watching this on YouTube. You should by now know that the light passes through the lens and strikes the recording media. The original recording media was the retina of the eye. A photon might have traveled for eons. It passes through the lens and comes to rest on the retina. There, it dies and it becomes a memory. Certainly, you are capable of imagining in your brain things that you have seen. Then came the camera obscura. Light was let through a small lens, which in many cases was nothing more than a small hole. The light inverted and cast on the far wall, or image plane, that which could be seen had someone looked through the small hole. There, on the image plane, though, it was upside down, and could be recorded by an artist or a technician. She or he would use something to record the image: paint, chalk, or charcoal. Then the recording media could be turned over, and it became something like a paint-by-the-number set. This is exactly how some of those old, large paintings that perhaps you have seen were painted. Then, of course, someone was added to the scene. In the early 1700s, some science types in different places around Europe were fooling around with chemicals, and they noticed that different salts darkened when they were exposed to light. This was interesting to them, but they didn't see where it was headed. This is almost always the case with observations and discoveries when they are made. Imagine, if you will, what Christopher Columbus would have said had someone asked him, "So, Chris, what's the use of this place that you have discovered? What will become of it?" There is no way that Columbus could have foreseen what would come from his discovery. It's the same with the Europeans who were fooling around with different salts and noticed that they darkened when exposed to light. Then, about 100 years later, along came the camera and the first photograph was made. That's it, and you can see, it's not much by today's standards, but it was big news back then. For the next 50 years, the recording media was first metal plates and then some glass plates. Each of these was smeared with different salts, exposed to light, and then treated with more chemicals to keep the salts from getting darker. The first photos were called daguerreotypes, and there was only one copy. That is, there was no way to make another photograph unless another photograph was taken or made. Here are a few famous ones that perhaps you have seen. Things did not change much with photography for the next 50 years. It was a long, slow process, and even up until the 1950s, photography was a specialized art and available to a few. Things did, however, really start to change with the inventions of plastics as the recording media. It was the same process, but easier and cheaper. A roll of plastic film was covered in salts that would darken when exposed to light. A game changer happened in 1946 with the recording media. Edwin Land was taking a photo of his 6-year-old daughter. She said, as all impatient young children do, "I want to see the photo, and I want to see it right now." That's my best child voice. Then, when she was told that she would have to wait, she asked the most important question that all children ask. "Why?" she cried. No one had ever asked that question to the right person. You see, Land was a chemist, and now with the right question in his head, he was able to make the calculations that would allow him to instantly see the photograph. 1 year later, in 1947, the Polaroid Land camera was introduced to the market, and billions of dollars have been made from the simple question that came from the mouth of a child. The next game changer with regard to the recording media was the CCD, or the Charged Coupled Device. It was invented in 1969 at Bell Labs by Willard Boyd and George Smith. Since the CCD was sensitive to light, it was used as an image sensor for video and TV cameras. In 1972, semiconductor maker Fairchild introduced the first experimental CCD for photography, which made exposures of the format 100 by 100 pixels. The image here is a very close-up view of a flat-screen computer monitor. You can see this for yourself by wetting your finger with clean, clear water and touching it to the screen on your computer monitor or phone. That little bump of water will act as a lens and allow you to see the pixelation of your phone or computer monitor. Sure, as you back away, the image on your screen looks like it is a sharp, clear image, but it is really just a bunch of small dots that we call pixels. The CCD can have way more pixels than your eye can, and the CCD can see in colors that you can't even imagine. The CCD can be thought of as an electronic retina. Just like the eye, the photon enters through the lens, strikes the retina, and creates an electrical signal that can be stored in a memory bank. The CCD, however, can be made sensitive to many other types of light that we can't see, and then those electrical signals can be turned into what we call false colors. We can engineer and make CCD chips that can see in radio waves, infrared, and X-rays. And another really neat thing about the CCDs is that we can make them far more sensitive than the human eye. And this takes us to the point that was mentioned earlier about pixels. Your cell phone camera is a much better piece of equipment than photographers have had for the last few hundred years. Perhaps you are asking yourself, how did photographers of yesteryear get some really good photos when my piece of equipment is better than anything that they had? The answer to your question is simple. The photograph must first exist in the photographer's head before she or he gets the actual photo that others will see. The photographer understands his or her piece of equipment and then places him or herself in the position to get the shot. The photographer gets his or her piece of equipment ready and then gets the photograph that has been in his or her head all along. By now, you should be able to write well-written responses to the following questions. How does the death of a photon in your eye take on a new life? What was the original recording media in the camera obscura? What is the value of making observations? How were the observations of the science types in the early 1700s put to good use by people 100 years later? Land was a trained scientist who lacked the proper simple question to set him on the right course. How is what happened to him important to others? That is, what does his experience with his daughter help us better understand today? When you did the experiment with the drop of water on your phone or on your computer monitor, what observations did you make?